I was sitting on my deck watching the sunrise over the Atlantic when I first saw the woman marching across the sand toward my private beach access. She wore white capris that were already dusted with sand, a pink visor, and the kind of determined expression that spelled trouble. I had moved to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina just 3 months ago, specifically to get away from this kind of nonsense, but apparently trouble had found me anyway. "Excuse me," she shouted, waving her arms like she was directing aircraft. "You there, on the deck." I took a slow sip of my coffee and watched her climb the weathered wooden steps that led from the beach to my property. The morning was too peaceful to rush into whatever confrontation she had planned. "Can I help you?" I asked when she finally reached the top, slightly out of breath. "I'm Brenda Peterson, president of the Sandpaper Shores HOA," she announced, thrusting a business card at me that I didn't take. "And I need to discuss your flagrant violation of community beach access rules." I raised an eyebrow. "Community beach access?" "Yes," she huffed. "You've been blocking the public pathway to the beach, and multiple homeowners have complained. This is unacceptable behavior, mister." She waited for me to fill in my name. "Alexander Johnson," I said, "and I haven't blocked anything. This is my private beach access." Brenda's face turned a shade of red that clashed with her visor. "There is no such thing as private beach access in Sandpaper Shores. All residents share equal access to the beach. It's in the HOA bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 4. "That's interesting," I said, setting down my coffee mug. "Because I don't live in Sandpaper Shores." She looked confused for the first time. "Don't be ridiculous. This house is clearly within the community boundaries." "This house," I said slowly, "is on the eastern edge of what used to be called the Morrison estate. I purchased it 4 months ago, along with the property it sits on, which, I might add, is not part of any HOA." Brenda pulled out her phone and started scrolling through what looked like a map. "That's impossible. Every property along this stretch of coastline is part of Sandpaper Shores." "Not this one," I assured her. "Feel free to check with your HOA attorney. My property line is clearly marked on all county records." She narrowed her eyes at me. "Even if that's true, which I doubt, you cannot prevent residents from accessing the beach. Beach access is a public right in South Carolina." This was where things got interesting. Actually, in South Carolina, property owners can own land up to the mean high water mark, and in some cases, through historical deeds, they can own even more. The Morrison family owned this land for over 150 years, and their deed predates most modern coastal access laws. "I don't care about historical deeds," Brenda snapped. "I have 40 families in my HOA who deserve beach access, and you're going to provide it." I stood up, suddenly tired of being polite. "Madam, you need to leave my property, now." "I will not. Not until you agree to allow proper beach access. You know who I am. I've been HOA president for 7 years. I've dealt with difficult homeowners before, and I always win." "I'm not a homeowner in your association," I reminded her, "which means you have exactly zero authority over me or my property." Brenda's face went from red to purple. "We'll see about that." She stormed back down the steps, pausing halfway to shout back, "You haven't heard the last of this, Mr. Johnson." I watched her march back across the sand, her white capris now completely sandy, and sighed. So much for a peaceful morning. The next day, I found a formal letter from the Sandpaper Shores HOA taped to my front door. It demanded that I attend an emergency meeting that evening at 7 to discuss beach access violations and property boundary disputes. The letter was signed by Brenda Peterson in elaborate cursive that took up 3 lines. I had no intention of going, but around 6:30, my curiosity got the better of me. Besides, I figured it might be entertaining to see what they had planned. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a beige building with palm trees planted out front that looked like it had been built in the 80s and never updated. I walked in at 7:15 to find about 50 people crammed into a room designed for 30. Brenda stood at the front near a podium and her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Ah, Mr. Johnson has decided to grace us with his presence." "I was curious," I said, taking a seat in the back row. "Well then, let's get started." Brenda clicked a remote and a projector screen lowered behind her. On it was an aerial photo of the coastline, with various properties marked in different colors. "As you can all see, this is our community beach access map. Every property owner has equal rights to the beach, as outlined in our HOA charter from 1992. She clicked again and my property appeared, marked with an angry red X. This property, owned by Mr. Alexander Johnson, has been illegally blocking beach access for the past 3 months. Despite multiple requests to remove the barriers, Mr. Johnson has refused to comply. "What barriers?" I asked loudly. Brenda glared at me. "Your fence, your deck, your stairs, and your apparent belief that you own the beach itself." "I do own the beach," I said calmly, "or at least a significant portion of it." The room erupted in murmurs. A man in the front row stood up. "That's impossible." "Beach access is protected by law." "Certain beaches are," I agreed, "but not all of them, especially not beaches that are part of historic land grants." Brenda clicked her remote frantically, bringing up a document on the screen. "This is a legal opinion I obtained from our HOA attorney. It clearly states that all beaches in South Carolina must provide public access." I pulled out my phone and opened a PDF I'd saved. "This is the original Morrison land deed from 1847. It grants ownership of the coastline from what is now marked as GPS coordinates." I rattled off the numbers, to approximately 2 miles south. That includes most of what you're calling Community Beach. The room went silent. A woman with gray hair in the third row raised her hand. "But we've been using that beach for 30 years. "Actually," I said, "you've been using it with permission from the Morrison family. They were very generous people who allowed the community access. But when Emily Morrison died last year and the estate went up for sale, that permission ended." Brenda looked like she was about to explode. "You cannot just revoke beach access. We have rights." "You have the rights that the property owner grants you," I corrected, "and currently that's none." She slammed her hand on the podium. "This is outrageous. We'll sue you." "You could try," I said. "But you'll lose, and it'll cost your HOA a lot of money in legal fees, money that comes from your members' pockets." An older man in the front row turned to face the crowd. "Wait, how much are we talking about? A property dispute case like this?" I shrugged. "Probably $50,000 to $100,000 in attorney fees. Maybe more if it goes to trial." The room erupted again, this time in worried conversations. People were pulling out their phones, probably calculating how much that would add to their HOA dues. Brenda tried to regain control. "Everyone, please. We cannot let this bully intimidate us." "I'm not bullying anyone," I said. "I'm just explaining property law." A younger woman near me raised her hand. "Mr. Johnson, if you own the beach, can we negotiate some kind of access agreement?" Before I could answer, Brenda cut in. "We will not negotiate with someone who's trying to steal our beach. It's not your beach," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "It never was." Brenda grabbed a thick binder from the podium. "I have here every HOA document from 1992 to present." Somewhere in these pages, there's proof that we have legal rights to that beach. "The HOA was founded in 1992, I said. "My deed is from 1847. Which one do you think takes precedence?" A man in a golf shirt stood up. But what about adverse possession? If we've been using the beach for 30 years, doesn't that give us some rights? I had been expecting this. Adverse possession requires that the use be hostile to the owner's interests. The Morrison family gave permission for beach access. That's not hostile use, that's permissive use. Big difference legally. Brenda was flipping through her binder frantically. There has to be something. There isn't, I said flatly. Look, I understand this is frustrating, but the law is clear. I own the property, which includes the beach access you've been using. A woman in the front stood up, her voice shaking. My grandchildren visit every summer. We've been taking them to that beach since they were born. You can't just take that away from us. I felt a twinge of guilt but held my ground. I didn't take anything away. The situation changed when the property was sold. That's not my fault. Brenda's eyes gleamed. Unless you were specifically trying to cut off beach access when you bought the property, that sounds like harassment to me. I bought the property because it was for sale and I liked it, I said. I wasn't even aware your HOA existed until you showed up on my deck yesterday morning. She wasn't backing down. I don't believe you. I think you knew exactly what you were doing. I stood up, tired of the circular argument. Believe what you want, Mrs. Peterson. The facts don't change. This meeting is pointless. As I walked toward the door, Brenda called out, "If you leave now, we'll consider it a declaration of war." I turned back. It's not a war. It's just property ownership. Good night, everyone. I heard raised voices behind me as I left, and I suspected the HOA members were now turning on Brenda, questioning why she had called an emergency meeting without verifying the legal facts first. The next morning, I woke up to find orange construction fencing installed along what Brenda apparently thought was the property line between my land and the HOA. The fencing ran from the street down to the beach, creating a bright orange scar across the landscape. I walked outside in my pajamas and coffee in hand to examine it. The fencing was placed about 20 feet into what was definitely my property, according to the survey I'd had done when I purchased the land. My phone rang. It was Marcus Reed, my attorney in Charleston. "Alex, what the hell is going on up there?" he asked. "I just got a call from an HOA attorney making wild claims about beach access." "They put up a fence on my property this morning," I said. "Does that count as trespassing?" "Absolutely." "Did they get a permit?" I looked at the fence posts. "I doubt it. This looks like it went up overnight." "Don't touch it," Marcus advised. "I want photographic evidence of everything. Then call the county code enforcement office and report unpermitted construction on private property." "Will do." "And Alex, how much of the beach do you actually own?" "Because this attorney seems to think you're claiming the entire coastline." "Not the entire coastline," I said. "Just about 2 miles of it." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Marcus, 2 miles, give or take." The survey was very detailed. The Morrison deed is one of the oldest continuous property deeds in South Carolina. It's rock solid. Marcus whistled. "Do you have any idea how much that's worth?" "I didn't buy it for the value. I bought it because I liked the house and wanted privacy." "Well, you've got a hell of a lot more than a house. That's prime Atlantic coastline. There are developers who would pay millions for a fraction of that. I'm not interested in selling." I know. But be prepared for this to get uglier before it gets better. When people realize what you actually own, they're going to come at you hard." He wasn't wrong. By noon, there were 2 news vans parked on the street outside my house. Apparently, someone from the HOA had called the local media about the beach access crisis. A reporter with too much makeup and a cameraman approached my fence. "Mr. Johnson, would you like to comment on the allegations that you're blocking public beach access?" "It's not public beach access," I called from my deck. "It's private property." But doesn't the public have a right to enjoy South Carolina's beaches? They have a right to enjoy public beaches, I said. This isn't one of them. The cameraman was filming the orange construction fence. What about this fence? Residents say you installed it to keep them out. I didn't install that fence, I said. The HOA did on my property without permission. That got the reporter's attention. The HOA installed a fence on your property, apparently. It was here when I woke up this morning. The reporter turned to the camera. This is Dana Wright, reporting from Myrtle Beach, where a property dispute has taken an unexpected turn. Back to you, Tom. After they left, I called Horry County Code Enforcement. The woman who answered sounded bored until I mentioned unpermitted construction. Address. I gave her the information. And you're the property owner? Yes, madam. I can have an inspector out there this afternoon. If the fence was installed without proper permits, we can issue a violation notice and order its removal. That would be great, thank you. The inspector, a tired-looking man named George who wore a county polo shirt, showed up at 3. He took one look at the orange fence and shook his head. No permit was filed for this, he said, consulting his tablet. And it appears to be on your property, not HOA common ground. That's correct. Do you know who installed it? The HOA president, I assume. Brenda Peterson. George made notes on his tablet. I'll need to inspect the entire installation and then I'll issue a violation notice. The fence will need to be removed within 72 hours or the HOA will face daily fines. Sounds good. As George was measuring and photographing the fence, a silver Mercedes pulled up and Brenda climbed out, along with a man in an expensive suit. What is going on here? She demanded. George didn't look up from his tablet. Code enforcement inspection. This fence was installed without proper permits. The man in the suit stepped forward. I'm Richard Moss, attorney for the Sandpiper Shores HOA. That fence was installed to clearly mark the boundary between HOA property and disputed territory. It's not disputed territory, I said. It's my property. That remains to be seen, Moss said smoothly. We're filing an emergency injunction to prevent Mr. Johnson from restricting beach access while the property boundaries are litigated. Marcus had warned me about this. File whatever you want. The deed is clear. Brenda pointed at George. You can't make us remove that fence. It's a safety measure, George finally looked up. Madam, I don't care what it is. It was installed without permits on private property. It needs to come down. This is harassment, Brenda shrieked. He's using his connections to harass our HOA. I don't have any connections, I said. I just follow the rules. You should try it sometime. Moss put a hand on Brenda's shoulder. Let me handle this. He turned to George. What if we file for an emergency permit right now? You can't get a permit to build on someone else's property without their permission, George said. And even if Mr. Johnson gave permission, which I'm guessing he won't, the permit process takes at least 10 business days. So we have to tear it down. Brenda looked like she might cry. By Saturday at 5 p.m. or the fines start, George confirmed. He handed her a violation notice on bright pink paper. Have a nice day. After they left, Brenda stood staring at the fence like it might disappear if she looked at it hard enough. Moss was on his phone, probably calling his office to file that injunction. You know, I said to Brenda, this could all have been avoided if you just checked property records before barging onto my deck yesterday morning. She turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. You think you're so smart. You think because you have some old piece of paper that you can just push people around. I'm not pushing anyone around. I'm literally just existing on my own property. That beach has been used by this community for decades. You have no right. I have every right. That's what ownership means. Moss finished his call and rejoined Brenda. We need to go. We have a lot of work to do before the injunction hearing tomorrow." "There's an injunction hearing tomorrow?" I asked. "Emergency hearing at 9 a.m., Moss said. "Judge Patterson's courtroom. You'll be served papers this evening." "Looking forward to it," I said dryly. After they left, I called Marcus back and filled him in on the injunction. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said. "But Alex, be prepared. They might find a sympathetic judge who issues a temporary order allowing beach access while the case is litigated." "Can they do that?" "It depends on how the judge views the public interest versus private property rights. If the judge thinks there's genuine harm being done to the community, they might issue a temporary access order, even though the property is definitely mine. Even then, injunctions are about preventing immediate harm, not determining ultimate ownership. That comes later." I spent the rest of the evening digging out every document related to my property purchase. The original Morrison deed, the title search, the survey, the title insurance policy, everything. If I was going to court tomorrow, I wanted to be prepared. The process server showed up at 7 with the injunction paperwork. It was 30 pages of legalese essentially arguing that denying beach access caused irreparable harm to the community, and that my property claims were dubious at best. I read through it twice, making notes in the margins. Moss was a good attorney. His arguments were creative even if they were ultimately wrong. The next morning, I met Marcus outside the Horry County Courthouse at 8:30. He was a tall black man in his 50s who had handled the closing on my property and had been the Morrison family attorney for 20 years. "How do you want to play this?" I asked. "Simple and factual," Marcus said. "We present the deed, the survey, and the title insurance policy. We show that your ownership is clear and unambiguous, and we point out that the HOA's sudden concern about beach access only emerged after you refused to be intimidated. Think it'll work? Judge Patterson is a stickler for property rights. As long as we can prove your ownership is legitimate, she won't issue an injunction." The courtroom was small and smelled like old wood and floor polish. Judge Patterson was a severe-looking woman in her 60s who wore reading glasses on a chain. Brenda sat in the front row behind Moss, looking smug. "All rise," the bailiff announced as we stood. Judge Patterson took her seat and immediately started reading through the paperwork. After a few minutes, she looked up. "Mr. Moss, you're asking for an emergency injunction to allow beach access across property owned by Mr. Johnson. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. The Sandpiper Shores community has enjoyed beach access across this property for over 30 years. Mr. Johnson's sudden restriction of that access causes immediate and irreparable harm to 40 families. Mr. Reed, your response." Marcus stood. "Your Honor, my client owns the property in question through a clear chain of title dating back to 1847. The previous owner, the Morrison family, allowed permissive use of the beach access, but that permission was never a legal right or easement. When Mr. Johnson purchased the property, he was under no obligation to continue that permission. And the HOA's claim of adverse possession," Judge Patterson asked, "fails on its face, Your Honor. Adverse possession requires hostile use. The use here was permissive. The Morrison family explicitly allowed it. That's documented in multiple HOA meeting minutes where they thanked the Morrisons for their generosity." Judge Patterson looked at Moss. "Do you have evidence of hostile use?" Moss stood again. "Your Honor, we believe the use evolved into an implied easement over time. Based on what? Based on 3 decades of continuous use by the community." "Permissive use," Marcus interjected. "With the owner's explicit consent, that cannot create an easement." Judge Patterson made a note. "What about the public trust doctrine? South Carolina recognizes public rights to beach access. Below the mean high water mark, yes, Marcus agreed. But Mr. Johnson isn't restricting access to the wet sand beach. He's restricting access across his private property to get to the beach. Those are different things. The nearest public beach access is 3 miles away, Moss argued. That's an unreasonable burden on the community. Inconvenience doesn't create a legal right, Marcus countered. Judge Peterson leaned back in her chair. Let me see the deed and survey. Marcus handed up the documents. The judge spent 10 minutes examining them, occasionally making notes. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Moss, I've reviewed the deed and survey. The ownership appears clear. Do you have any evidence that challenges the validity of Mr. Johnson's title? We're in the process of obtaining a competing survey, Your Honor. You don't have it now. No, Your Honor. So you're asking me to issue an injunction based on the possibility that you might find evidence that contradicts this deed? Moss shifted uncomfortably. We believe there are legitimate questions about the property boundaries. Questions are not evidence. Judge Peterson removed her glasses. I'm not going to issue an injunction forcing a property owner to allow access across his land based on speculation. If you obtain evidence that challenges his ownership, you can file a proper lawsuit. But an emergency injunction is not appropriate here. Your Honor, the community, Moss started. The community's desires do not override clear property rights, Judge Peterson interrupted. If the HOA wants beach access, they can negotiate with Mr. Johnson or they can purchase their own beach access. Motion for injunction denied. Brenda gasped audibly behind Moss. I kept my face neutral, but I felt a wave of relief. Furthermore, Judge Peterson continued, I see in the file that the HOA installed a fence on Mr. Johnson's property without permission. Mrs. Peterson, are you present? Brenda stood reluctantly. Yes, Your Honor. That fence needs to come down immediately. Installing structures on someone else's property is trespassing, and if you were anyone else, I'd consider it criminal. Consider this your only warning. But Your Honor, we need to mark the boundary, Brenda protested. Then hire a surveyor and install a fence on your own property. We're adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Brenda was red-faced and furious. This isn't over, she hissed at me. Actually, it kind of is, I said. Moss pulled her away before she could respond. Marcus and I walked to his car. That went well, Marcus said. Better than expected. Thanks for coming up on short notice. Alex, I need to talk to you about something. Marcus unlocked his car but didn't get in. Do you realize what you actually own here? A house and some beach property. No, you own 2 miles of prime Atlantic coastline. Do you know what developers would pay for that? I told you I'm not selling. I know. But you need to understand the value we're talking about. That land could be worth $20, maybe $30 million if it were developed properly. I felt my stomach drop. 30 million, at least. Probably more if you found the right buyer. The Morrison family never developed it because they valued privacy and conservation. But you're sitting on a gold mine. I don't want to develop it, I said firmly. I'm not suggesting you should. But you need to be aware that other people know this now. That news story yesterday, it's going to attract attention. Developers, investors, speculators, they're going to start approaching you with offers. I'll turn them down. I know you will, but be prepared for it to get aggressive. When this much money is involved, people get creative. He wasn't kidding. By the time I got home that afternoon, I had 17 missed calls from unknown numbers, and my email inbox was flooded with messages from real estate investors. One email particularly caught my attention. It was from Coastal Development Corporation, offering to purchase my entire property for $18 million. Cash, close in 30 days. I deleted it without responding. The orange fence came down on Friday afternoon, removed by a crew hired by the HOA. Brenda supervised from her golf cart, shooting hostile glances at my house every few minutes. I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. On Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of voices on the beach. I looked out my window to see at least 30 people setting up umbrellas, chairs, and coolers on the sand directly in front of my house. I got dressed and walked down to the beach. Brenda was there, sitting in a folding chair with a megaphone in her lap. "Morning, Mr. Johnson," she said sweetly. "Beautiful day for the beach, isn't it? What are you doing?" Beach protest. "This is still technically below the mean high water mark, so it's public property. We have every right to be here." I looked at the waterline. She was right. They were all carefully positioned on the wet sand, just barely within the public access area. "This is petty," I said. "This is principle," Brenda corrected. "We're protesting your unfair restriction of beach access." A younger woman held up a sign that read "Beaches for Everyone." Another sign said, "Stop beach bullying." "I'm not bullying anyone," I said tiredly. "You're restricting access to a natural resource that should be available to all," Brenda announced through her megaphone, even though I was standing 5 feet away. "We will not be silenced. We will not be intimidated," the crowd cheered. I noticed several people filming on their phones. "Enjoy your protest," I said, turning back to my house. As I walked away, Brenda's voice boomed through the megaphone. "Freedom of access, freedom of beaches, freedom from tyranny." The protest continued all day, and the next day, and the day after that. By Wednesday, it had become a spectacle. The news crews were back, interviewing Brenda and the protesters. Social media picked it up, with hashtags like "Beaches for All" and "Stop Beach Bullying" trending locally. I ignored it all. They were on public sand, they had a right to be there, and eventually they'd get tired and go home. Marcus called me on Thursday morning. "Have you seen the news?" "I've been avoiding it." "Brenda Peterson is calling for a town hall meeting at the county level to discuss beach access reform. She's gotten 3 county council members on board." "Can they do anything?" "Not legally, no. Your deed predates any county regulations, but they can make noise and cause problems. You might want to show up and set the record straight." The town hall was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the county government complex. I really didn't want to go, but Marcus was right that I needed to set the record straight before the situation spiraled further out of control. The meeting room was packed. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. I recognized most of the faces from the HOA meeting and the beach protest. County Council Chairman Dale Murphy called the meeting to order. "We're here tonight to discuss beach access concerns raised by the Sandpiper Shores HOA. Mrs. Peterson, you have the floor." Brenda stood and approached the microphone. She had clearly prepared a speech. "Thank you, Chairman Murphy. I'm here tonight representing 40 families who have been suddenly and unfairly denied access to a beach they've used for 30 years. Mr. Alexander Johnson purchased the old Morrison property 3 months ago and immediately began restricting access. He claims to own 2 miles of coastline, which would make him one of the largest private landowners on the Atlantic coast." She paused for effect. "This is not just about one community's beach access. This is about the principle that our beaches belong to everyone. South Carolina has always been a state that values public access to natural resources. We cannot allow one wealthy individual to wall off miles of coastline for his private use." The crowd applauded. Brenda continued, "I'm asking the county council to investigate Mr. Johnson's property claims and, if necessary, to pursue eminent domain proceedings to ensure public access to this vital natural resource." That got my attention. Eminent domain meant the government could forcibly purchase my property for public use. Chairman Murphy nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. Mr. Johnson, would you like to respond? I stood and walked to the microphone. My name is Alexander Johnson. I purchased the Morrison property 4 months ago through a legitimate sale with clear title. The deed to this property dates back to 1847 and has been continuously maintained by the Morrison family for over a century and a half. I didn't wall off any beach. I simply stopped allowing private access across my land, which is my right as a property owner. But you're preventing people from enjoying the beach, someone shouted from the audience. I'm preventing people from crossing my private property, I corrected. There's a public beach access 3 miles north. People are welcome to use that. 3 miles, Brenda exclaimed. That's completely unreasonable. It's also irrelevant to property rights, I said. My ownership of this land is legal and clear. If the county wants to pursue eminent domain, they're welcome to try, but they'll need to prove public necessity and pay fair market value. Given that similar coastline properties have sold for millions per acre, that would be quite expensive for the taxpayers. That quieted the crowd a bit. I could see people doing mental math. Council member Sarah Jenkins spoke up. Mr. Johnson, have you had the property independently surveyed since your purchase? Yes, madam. A complete survey was done as part of the title insurance process. I can provide copies to the council if needed. And this survey confirms that you own the beach itself, not just the land leading to it. It confirms that my property extends to and in some places beyond the mean high water mark. Yes. This is consistent with the original 1847 deed and subsequent surveys done over the past century and a half. Jenkins made notes. And you're unwilling to grant any kind of easement for beach access. At this point, no, I said. If the HOA had approached me respectfully, we might have been able to work something out. Instead, they've trespassed on my property, installed unauthorized fencing, harassed me, held protests, and now they're asking the county to seize my land. I'm not inclined to cooperate with people who treat me that way. Brenda jumped up. That's extortion. He's trying to extort money from us. I'm not asking for anything, I said calmly. I just want to be left alone on my own property. You're the ones who keep escalating this situation. Chairman Murphy held up his hand. All right, everyone settle down. Mr. Johnson, the council will review the property records and the legal issues involved. In the meantime, I'd encourage you and Mrs. Peterson to try to reach some kind of compromise. I'm willing to discuss reasonable solutions, I said, but not under threat of eminent domain. We're not threatening, we're requesting, Murphy said. This meeting is adjourned. After the meeting, I was surrounded by reporters asking for comments. I gave brief, factual answers and left as quickly as possible. Marcus was waiting in the parking lot. That eminent domain threat was a bluff. How do you know? Because Horry County doesn't have the money to seize 2 miles of Atlantic coastline. The fair market value would be astronomical, and they know it. Brenda's just trying to pressure you. It's not going to work. I know. But be careful, Alex. She's getting desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. The next morning, I discovered just how stupid. I woke up to find large signs installed every 20 feet along the road in front of my property. They read beach access denied by greedy landowner with an arrow pointing at my house. I called code enforcement again. George showed up an hour later, looking even more tired than before. No permits, he confirmed. And they're in the county right of way, which means they're illegal regardless. I'll issue another violation. Is this ever going to end? I asked. George looked at me sympathetically. In my experience, not until one side gives up or runs out of money. The signs came down by court order that afternoon, but the damage was done. My house had been on the news again, this time with the greedy landowner signs visible in every shot. I started getting hate mail, physical letters sent to my address calling me selfish, greedy, and worse. Someone spray-painted "beach thief" on my mailbox. I had to install security cameras around the property. Then things got worse. On Friday night, someone cut through the fence around my property and vandalized my deck. They spray-painted "Public Beach" across the wooden boards and smashed 2 of my deck chairs. I called the police. Deputy Martinez showed up an hour later to take a report. "You know who did this?" she asked, photographing the damage. "I have my suspicions, but no proof." "The HOA dispute?" "Yes," Martinez nodded. "I've been reading about it. Look, between you and me, I'd press charges if you catch anyone. This has gone beyond a property dispute into criminal behavior." "I will." I reviewed the security camera footage after she left. The cameras had captured 2 figures in dark clothing cutting the fence at midnight. They'd worn masks, so I couldn't identify them, but one was wearing a shirt with the Sandpiper Shores HOA logo on it. I sent the footage to Martinez and to Marcus. Marcus called me the next morning. "This is good evidence. If they do anything else, we can get a restraining order against the HOA." "Against the whole HOA." "Against Brenda Peterson specifically, and against any HOA members who trespass or vandalize. It won't stop everyone, but it'll make them think twice." That weekend was quiet. The protests had stopped, probably because Brenda realized they weren't achieving anything. I spent the time repairing my deck and reinforcing my fence. On Monday, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Johnson, this is Frank Castellano with Meridian Development Group. I'd like to discuss a business opportunity with you." "Not interested," I said. "I think you will be when you hear what I'm offering. $35 million for your entire property, plus relocation expenses and a $50,000 consulting fee." I paused. $35 million, that's right. "I understand you're having some local difficulties with beach access. I can make all of that go away. I have connections with the county council and the HOA. Once I own the property, those issues disappear. Because you'd grant the HOA beach access. Among other arrangements, yes. I've done deals like this before. Everyone walks away happy." "What would you do with the property?" "Develop it, of course. 2 miles of Atlantic coastline. I could build a luxury resort, condos, maybe a marina. The return on investment would be substantial. And the natural habitat." "The wildlife," Castellano laughed. "Come on, Mr. Johnson. You're a businessman. You understand that land is meant to be used, not just looked at." "I'm not a businessman," I said. "And I'm not interested in selling, especially not to someone who wants to destroy the coastline." $40 million, Castellano said quickly. "That's my final offer. The answer is still no. You're making a mistake. That land is worth more developed than it is sitting empty. To you, maybe. Not to me. Goodbye, Mr. Castellano." I hung up and immediately called Marcus. "How did a developer get my private number?" "I don't know, but I'm not surprised. These guys have resources." "Did he make an offer?" $40 million. Marcus whistled. "That's serious money, Alex." "I know. I still said no." "Good, because I did some research on Meridian Development Group. They've been involved in several coastal development projects that destroyed wetlands and wildlife habitats. There's been lawsuits and fines. They're bad news." "That's what I figured. But Alex, if they're offering $40 million, that means they think they can make double that by developing it. You need to be very careful. These guys don't like taking no for an answer." That afternoon, I got a visit from council member Sarah Jenkins. She knocked on my door looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Johnson, I apologize for dropping by unannounced. Do you have a few minutes? Sure. We sat on my newly repaired deck. Jenkins looked out at the ocean and sighed. I've been on the county council for 8 years, and I've never dealt with anything like this situation. Neither have I assured her. I've reviewed all the property records. Your deed is legitimate. The Morrison family owned this land legally for over 150 years. You have clear title. So, why are we having this conversation? Because I'm caught between property rights and community needs. I believe in both. Those 40 families in the HOA aren't wrong to want beach access. But they're also not entitled to cross your private property to get it. I appreciate that you understand that, I said. Have you considered selling an easement? Not giving access away for free, but creating a legal right-of-way in exchange for compensation. How much compensation are we talking about? Jenkins shrugged. That would be negotiated, but the HOA has a reserve fund. They might be able to afford something reasonable. And if I say no, then the situation continues as is. The county can't force you to grant access. Eminent domain won't fly here. There's no legitimate public use that justifies it when public beach access exists 3 miles away. That's honest of you. I don't believe in wasting people's time with false hopes. But I do think there might be a middle ground here if both sides are willing to be reasonable. After Jenkins left, I thought about what she'd said. Maybe an easement wasn't a bad idea, but I'd need protections. Limits on usage, liability waivers, maintenance responsibilities. It would have to be carefully structured. I called Marcus and ran the idea past him. It's possible, he said. We'd need to draft a very detailed easement agreement. Limited use, specific hours, maximum number of users at any given time, maintenance obligations, insurance requirements. It would be complicated, but doable. If both sides negotiate in good faith, yes. The problem is Brenda Peterson. She's not interested in good faith negotiations. Then we need to deal with the reasonable HOA members directly, bypass Brenda. That turned out to be easier said than done. When I called the HOA's main office number, I was told that all communications had to go through Brenda as president. I tried a different approach. I looked up the HOA board members online and found contact information for the vice president, a man named Tom Harrison. I called him that evening. Mr. Harrison, this is Alexander Johnson. I wanted to discuss the beach access situation. There was a pause. How did you get this number? Public records. Look, I know I'm probably not your favorite person right now, but I think we might be able to work something out if we can have a reasonable conversation. Brenda's not going to like you going around her. With respect, Brenda's part of the problem. She's been hostile from day one. Harrison sighed. I know. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Johnson, not everyone on the board agrees with how she's handled this. Some of us think she's made it worse. I agree. What did you have in mind? A limited easement for beach access. Specific terms, proper documentation, maybe some compensation to cover my legal costs and property value impact. But it has to be reasonable and respectful. How limited? We'd have to negotiate the details, but I'm thinking restricted hours, a maximum number of users, maintenance obligations, liability insurance. It wouldn't be unlimited access like it was under the Morrisons, but it would be something. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Let me talk to some other board members. Quietly, I'll get back to you. He called back 2 days later. I've talked to 4 other board members. They're willing to meet with you to discuss terms, but it has to be without Brenda. Won't that cause problems? Probably. But we're allowed to hold meetings without her as long as we have quorum, and we have enough votes to override her if we reach an agreement. We scheduled a meeting for the following Sunday afternoon at Tom Harrison's house. Besides Tom, there would be 3 other board members: Linda Chen, the treasurer, Robert Davis, the secretary, and Maria Gonzalez, a regular board member. I brought Marcus with me. The 5 HOA board members looked nervous but determined. "Before we start," Tom said, "I want to be clear that we're grateful you're willing to discuss this at all. Brenda's behavior has been embarrassing for many of us." "I appreciate that," I said. "So what exactly are you proposing?" Marcus laid out a folder of documents. "We've drafted a proposed easement agreement. It grants a right-of-way across Mr. Johnson's property for beach access with the following conditions." He went through the terms: limited access from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., maximum of 50 people on the beach access path at any given time. The HOA would be responsible for maintaining the path and would carry liability insurance. Any damages caused by HOA members would be the HOA's responsibility. The easement could be revoked if terms were violated. "And the cost?" Linda Chen asked. "We're proposing a one-time payment of $50,000 to cover Mr. Johnson's legal expenses and as compensation for the property value impact." The board members exchanged glances. "That's reasonable," Maria Gonzalez said quietly. "The HOA reserve fund currently has about $70,000, Linda said. "We could afford this." "But Brenda will fight it," Robert warned. "Let her fight it," Tom said. "We have the votes. If 5 of the 7 board members approve this, it passes." We spent the next 2 hours going through the easement agreement line by line, making small adjustments and clarifications. By the end, we had a document that everyone could live with. "I'll prepare this for a board vote," Tom said. "We'll schedule a special meeting for next week." "What about Brenda?" I asked. "She has to be notified of the meeting, and she has a right to be there and vote, but she can't stop it." The special board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening. I wasn't required to attend, but I showed up anyway, curious to see how it would play out. The meeting was held in the HOA Community Center. Brenda arrived looking suspicious. "Why was this meeting called?" she demanded. Tom, who was chairing the meeting in his capacity as vice president, remained calm. "We have an easement agreement to vote on regarding beach access across the Johnson property." Brenda's eyes widened. "You negotiated without me. We negotiated as board members, which we're entitled to do." "You were properly notified of this meeting." "This is outrageous. I'm the president, and we respect that," Linda Chen said. "But this is a board decision, not a unilateral one." Tom distributed copies of the easement agreement. Brenda read through it, her face getting redder with each page. $50,000. You're paying him $50,000 for access we already have a right to." "We don't have a right to it," Robert Davis corrected. "The judge made that clear. This easement gives us a legal right that we don't currently possess." "It's a limited easement," Brenda protested. "Only 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., maximum 50 people. This is ridiculous." "It's better than no access at all," Maria pointed out. "I vote no," Brenda said firmly. "This is a waste of HOA funds and a capitulation to a bully." "Noted," Tom said. "Other votes?" "I vote yes." "Yes," Linda said. "Yes," Robert said. "Yes," Maria said. The other 2 board members also voted yes. 6 yes, 1 no, Tom announced. "The motion passes. Mrs. Peterson, as treasurer, you'll need to prepare the payment." "I will not." Brenda stood up, knocking her chair over. "I refuse to execute this agreement." "Then we'll remove you as treasurer and appoint someone who will," Tom said calmly. "The board has spoken, Brenda." She looked around the room at the other board members. "You're all traitors, every one of you." "We're being practical," Linda said. "You've wasted thousands of dollars in legal fees fighting a battle we couldn't win. This easement gives us what we actually need at a reasonable price." Brenda grabbed her purse. "I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. The full membership will vote on this." "The membership doesn't vote on easements," Marcus interjected. "That's a board decision under your HOA bylaws," I checked. Brenda glared at him, then at me, then back at the board. "I resign." She stormed out of the community center. The remaining board members looked at each other in shock. "Did she just resign?" Maria asked. "I think so," Tom said. "I'll need to check the bylaws on what happens next." Marcus leaned over to me and whispered, "That went better than expected. We finalized and signed the easement agreement the following week." The HOA transferred $50,000 to my account, and I signed over a permanent easement for beach access with all the agreed-upon terms. The local news covered it as a feel-good story about compromise and community cooperation. I declined to be interviewed, but Tom Harrison did a good job explaining the agreement and emphasizing that it served everyone's interests. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong again. 2 weeks after the easement was finalized, I got a call from Deputy Martinez. "Mr. Johnson, we've arrested someone for the vandalism of your property. Can you come down to the station to identify them?" I drove to the Horry County Sheriff's Office. Martinez led me to a viewing room where I could see into an interrogation room through one-way glass. Inside was a young man in his 20s I didn't recognize, and sitting next to him was Brenda Peterson. "That's not one of the people in the security footage," I said. "They were both wearing masks." "We know," Martinez said, "but this individual confessed to the vandalism. He says he was paid to do it." "Paid by who?" "By Mrs. Peterson." I looked through the glass at Brenda. She was talking animatedly to an attorney, gesturing angrily. "Are you charging her if the evidence supports it? The confession is a good start, but we need corroboration." "That's where your security footage comes in. Can you identify anything about the person in the video that might match this suspect?" I thought back to the footage. One of them was wearing an HOA shirt. We found that shirt in the suspect's apartment. It has Mrs. Peterson's signature on it. Apparently, she gave him one of the shirts she'd had made for the beach protests. That's pretty damning. It is. We also have text messages between Mrs. Peterson and the suspect discussing payment. $500 to vandalize your property and make it look like a spontaneous protest action. I shook my head. She really couldn't let it go. Apparently not. Will you press charges? Against the suspect who actually did the vandalism? Absolutely. Against Brenda? I hesitated. What would the charges be? Conspiracy to commit vandalism, possibly solicitation to commit a crime. They're misdemeanors, but she could face fines and probation. Then yes, I'll press charges. Brenda Peterson was formally charged 3 days later. Her arrest made the local news, and suddenly the narrative around the beach access dispute completely changed. Instead of being portrayed as a community advocate standing up to a greedy landowner, she was now seen as someone who'd gone too far and broken the law. The HOA board released a statement condemning her actions and emphasizing that they did not represent the organization's values. Tom Harrison was appointed interim president. Brenda's trial was scheduled for 2 months later. In the meantime, the beach access easement was working smoothly. HOA members respected the terms, used the path responsibly, and caused no problems. A few people even stopped by my deck to thank me for working out the agreement. On a Sunday morning about a month after Brenda's arrest, I was drinking coffee on my deck when an older couple approached. "I recognized them from the first HOA meeting, Mr. Johnson," the woman called up. "Could we talk to you for a minute?" "Sure." They climbed the steps. The man extended his hand. "I'm Robert Davis, board secretary. This is my wife, Alina. We wanted to apologize for how you were treated." "You already apologized at the board meeting," I said. "I know, but I wanted to do it again properly. Eleanor and I have lived in Sandpiper Shores for 15 years. We knew Emily Morrison. She was a wonderful woman who loved this land. I wish I'd had the chance to meet her, I said. She would have liked you, Eleanor said. She always said the land should be preserved, not developed. That's why she refused to sell to developers for so many years, even though she could have made a fortune. I feel the same way. Robert nodded. We know. That's why we wanted to thank you. Not just for the easement, but for keeping the land as it is. There's not much untouched coastline left in South Carolina. After they left, I sat on my deck thinking about Emily Morrison. I'd bought her property without knowing much about her, but it was clear she'd been someone who valued the land for what it was, not what it could become. I made a decision. I called Marcus. I want to put the property in a conservation trust, I said. A conservation trust? Yes. I want to ensure that it can never be developed even after I'm gone. Can we do that? Marcus was quiet for a moment. We can. It's actually a very smart move from a tax perspective too. But you'd be giving up the development rights permanently. You understand that? That's the point. Okay. I'll draw up the paperwork. This is a good thing you're doing, Alex. The Conservation Trust was established 3 weeks later. The terms were clear. The land would remain in its natural state in perpetuity. The house could be maintained and lived in, but no additional development was permitted. The HOA easement would remain in effect. When I eventually sold the property or passed away, the trust terms would transfer to the new owner. I announced the Conservation Trust at the next HOA meeting. Tom Harrison had invited me to address the membership, and I agreed. The community center was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was different, friendly, even curious. I know we got off to a rough start, I began, but I wanted to share some good news. I've placed my property in a conservation trust. That means 2 miles of Atlantic coastline will remain undeveloped permanently. It can't be turned into condos or resorts or anything else. It'll stay natural. The room erupted in applause. I was surprised by the enthusiasm. It also means the beach access easement is permanent, I continued. As long as the terms are respected, your community will have access to that stretch of beach forever. More applause. After the meeting, at least a dozen people came up to shake my hand and thank me. Tom Harrison pulled me aside. That was above and beyond, Alex. Thank you. It was the right thing to do, I said. Brenda Peterson's trial took place on a Tuesday morning in late September. I had to testify about the vandalism and the events leading up to it. Brenda sat at the defense table looking bitter and defeated. The prosecution laid out a clear case. The security footage showed 2 people vandalizing my property. The suspect had confessed and identified Brenda as the person who'd hired him. Text messages confirmed the arrangement. The HOA shirt found in the suspect's apartment had Brenda's signature on it. Brenda's attorney tried to argue that she'd been acting out of frustration over a community issue, but the judge wasn't sympathetic. Mrs. Peterson, you're an educated woman who served as HOA president for 7 years. You know better than to hire someone to vandalize property. The fact that you were frustrated doesn't excuse criminal behavior. Brenda was convicted of conspiracy to commit vandalism and solicitation to commit a crime. She was sentenced to 6 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my property, which came to about $1,500. As she left the courtroom, she glared at me one last time. I didn't react. I felt no satisfaction in her conviction, just relief that the whole ordeal was finally over. After the trial, things settled into a peaceful routine. I worked on my house, enjoyed the beach, and watched the wildlife. Dolphins swam past most mornings. Pelicans dove for fish. Sea turtles nested on the sand. The HOA members who used the beach access were respectful and friendly. Some brought their grandchildren and told them about the importance of conservation. Kids built sandcastles and looked for shells. One afternoon, about 6 months after everything had been resolved, I was walking along the beach when I noticed a young woman taking photographs. She had professional equipment and was carefully documenting the coastline. "Beautiful spot," she called to me. "It is. Are you Alexander Johnson?" I was immediately wary. "Who's asking?" "I'm Dr. Rachel Kim from the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. I've been studying coastal preservation, and your conservation trust came to my attention." "Oh, yes, I'm Alex." She walked over and shook my hand. "What you've done here is remarkable. 2 miles of completely undeveloped Atlantic coastline. Do you know how rare that is?" "I'm starting to understand. We've identified at least 3 endangered species using this habitat. Sea turtles, piping plovers, and a particular species of beach grass that's almost extinct. This land is ecologically invaluable." "That's good to know. Would you be willing to allow researchers occasional access to study the area? We'd be very careful and respectful of the property." "Sure. As long as it doesn't disturb the wildlife." Dr. Kim smiled. "That's exactly the point. We want to understand how to protect areas like this. You've done something important here, Mr. Johnson. Future generations will benefit from your decision." As I watched Dr. Kim return to her photography, I thought about the path that had led me here. The confrontation with Brenda, the legal battles, the protests, the vandalism. It had all seemed overwhelming at the time, but in the end it had resulted in something good. The land was protected. The community had beach access. Wildlife had a safe habitat. Emily Morrison's legacy lived on. Sometimes the right thing is also the hardest thing, but that doesn't make it any less right. I walked back to my house, climbed the steps to my deck, and sat down with a fresh cup of coffee. The sun was starting to set, painting the ocean in shades of orange and gold. A pod of dolphins swam past, their fins cutting through the calm water. This was why I'd bought the property. Not for the investment potential or the prestige of owning 2 miles of coastline, but for moments like this. Peace, natural beauty, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd made the right choice. The next few months passed quietly. The Conservation Trust attracted some positive media attention, with several environmental groups praising the decision. I even received a commendation from the South Carolina Coastal Conservation League. Tom Harrison remained HOA president and proved to be reasonable and competent. The beach access easement continued to work smoothly. Brenda completed her community service and probation without incident, though I never saw her again. I heard she'd moved to a different neighborhood. One morning in late spring, I received a call from an unexpected source. "Mr. Johnson, this is Frank Castellano. We spoke last year about your property. The developer who'd offered $40 million. I remember, I told you I wasn't interested in selling. I know and I respect that. I'm not calling about a purchase. I'm calling to apologize." That surprised me. "Apologize for what?" "After you turned down my offer, I did some digging into your background. I wanted to understand why someone would turn down that kind of money. What I found impressed me. You're not some eccentric rich guy trying to keep the beach to yourself. You genuinely care about conservation." "Okay. And the conservation trust you set up. That was smart. It protects the land forever. I've been in development for 30 years, and I've seen a lot of beautiful coastline destroyed by short-sighted decisions. What you did was the opposite of short-sighted. Thank you. I'm calling because I want to fund a scholarship in Emily Morrison's name for students studying coastal conservation. Would you be willing to help me set that up?" I was stunned. Why would you do that? Because maybe it's time I gave something back. I've made a lot of money developing land. Some of it probably shouldn't have been developed. This is a small way to balance the scales. We met the following week to discuss the scholarship. Castellano was putting up $50,000 annually to fund full rides for 2 students pursuing degrees in environmental science with a focus on coastal conservation. I've been thinking, Castellano said over lunch, about legacy. What do we leave behind? I've built condos and resorts all up and down the Atlantic coast. They'll be torn down eventually, but that land you protected, that'll be there long after both of us are gone. That's the idea. You made me question some things, Alex. Can I call you Alex? Sure. You made me question whether I've been building things that matter or just things that make money. That's an uncomfortable question at my age. It's never too late to change direction. Castellano smiled. Maybe not. I'm starting to look at conservation projects. Ways to restore Coastline instead of developing it. It won't be as profitable, but it might be more satisfying. The Emily Morrison Coastal Conservation Scholarship was announced that summer. The first 2 recipients were students from the University of South Carolina who had been studying sea turtle populations. Dr. Kim called me with the news. This is wonderful, Alex. These students will do important work. Frank Castellano deserves the credit. You inspired him. That's worth something too. A year after I'd first confronted Brenda Peterson on my deck, I hosted a small gathering to celebrate the anniversary of the Conservation Trust. I invited the HOA board, Dr. Kim and her research team, the scholarship recipients, and a few other people who'd been part of the journey. We stood on the beach at sunset, about 30 of us, looking out at the ocean. Tom Harrison raised a glass. A year ago, this could have gone very differently. We could have ended up with years of litigation and bitter feelings. Instead, we have protected Coastline, community beach access, and a scholarship that'll help future generations. That's because one person chose to do the right thing even when it was difficult. Everyone looked at me. I felt embarrassed but also proud. Emily Morrison deserves the credit, I said. She protected this land for over 80 years. I'm just continuing her work. That's what makes it meaningful, Dr. Kim added. Legacy isn't about one person. It's about each generation choosing to preserve what matters. As the sun set and the gathering dispersed, I stayed on the beach. The waves rolled in steadily, the same as they had for millions of years. Sea turtles would nest here this summer. Dolphins would hunt fish offshore. Piping plovers would raise their young in the dunes. And generations from now, long after I was gone, this stretch of coastline would still be here. Undeveloped, natural, alive. That was worth more than $40 million. That was worth every moment of conflict and frustration. That was worth everything. I walked back to my house as darkness fell, the sound of the ocean following me up the steps to my deck. Inside, I poured myself a drink and stood at the window, looking out at the water. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Saw the scholarship announcement. Nice work. Emily would be proud. I smiled and typed back. Thanks for everything. Another text came through, this one from Tom Harrison. Board voted unanimously to name the beach access path the Morrison Memorial Trail. Thought you should know. That seemed fitting. Emily Morrison had loved this land enough to protect it for a lifetime. The least we could do was remember her name. I settled into my favorite chair and opened a book, the ocean breeze coming through the open window. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear laughter from families on the beach, enjoying the evening. This was what community looked like. Not an HOA demanding compliance, but people respecting shared spaces and working together to protect something valuable. The next morning, I woke to brilliant sunshine and calm seas. I made coffee and walked out to my deck. A group of pelicans flew past in formation, heading south along the coastline. As I stood there, I thought about the journey from that first confrontation with Brenda to where things stood now. It had been difficult and frustrating, but ultimately worthwhile. Sometimes standing your ground isn't about being stubborn or selfish. Sometimes it's about protecting something that needs protecting, even when others don't understand or agree. The Conservation Trust would ensure this land remained wild and natural forever. The easement would provide community access while respecting property boundaries. The scholarship would educate future conservationists, and Emily Morrison's legacy would live on. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to Emily, to Marcus, to Tom Harrison and the reasonable HOA board members, to Dr. Kim and her research team, and even to Frank Castellano for his unexpected change of heart. But most of all, I toasted to the land itself. 2 miles of Atlantic coastline that would remain exactly as it was meant to be. Wild, beautiful, and free. As I finished my coffee and watched the sun climb higher in the sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Complete peace. No more disputes, no more battles, no more drama. Just a man, a house, and a coastline worth protecting. That evening I received one final unexpected visitor. An elderly man with a cane slowly climbed my deck steps. I didn't recognize him. "Mr. Johnson," he called out. "Yes, my name is William Morrison. I'm Emily's nephew." I invited him to sit. He looked out at the ocean with tears in his eyes. "I heard what you did," he said quietly. "The Conservation Trust, the scholarship, protecting the land. I tried to honor your aunt's wishes. You did more than that. You understood what she understood. This land is special. It's not just property or an investment. It's a living thing that deserves respect." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "Aunt Emily left letters for several people. This one is addressed to whoever bought her property. I was supposed to give it to you months ago, but I couldn't bring myself to do it until I knew what kind of person you were." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter in elegant handwriting. "To the new owner of my beloved home, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you now hold the future of this land in your hands. I hope you can see what I always saw. Not a commodity to be exploited, but a treasure to be protected. This coastline has been in my family since 1847. 6 generations of Morrisons have walked this beach, raised children here, and found peace in the rhythm of the waves. We could have sold it many times for enormous sums. Developers constantly approached us with offers. We always said no. Not because we didn't need the money or couldn't imagine better uses for the land. We said no because some things are more important than money. Some things are meant to be preserved, not transformed. I hope you feel the same way. I hope you'll stand firm against the pressure to develop or sell. I hope you'll find the same peace here that I found. And if you can't do that, if the pressure becomes too much, I understand. But please, at least give the land a chance to be what it's meant to be. With hope and gratitude, Emily Morrison." I read the letter twice, my throat tight with emotion. "She would be so happy," William said. "She worried constantly about what would happen after she was gone. She almost didn't sell, thought about trying to set up some kind of trust herself, but her finances wouldn't support it. So she trusted whoever bought it to do the right thing. Yes." "And you did." William stood slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. You've given me peace about my aunt's legacy." After he left, I sat holding Emily's letter as darkness fell. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm, waves rolling in and out, in and out. I had made the right choice. Not the profitable choice, not the easy choice, but the right one. And in the end, that's what mattered most. The seasons turned. Summer brought families to the beach, respectfully using the Morrison Memorial Trail. Fall brought cooler temperatures and migrating birds. Winter brought storms and solitude. Spring brought new life, turtle hatchlings making their way to the sea. Through it all, the land remained protected, wild and free. And I remained its guardian, honored to carry on Emily Morrison's legacy, and determined to ensure that this small stretch of Atlantic coastline would remain unchanged for generations to come. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies or proving you're right. Sometimes it's simply protecting what needs protecting and trusting that future generations will understand why it mattered. I learned that lesson on a deck overlooking the Atlantic, in a confrontation with an HOA president who couldn't see past her own demands. And I carry it with me every day as I watch the sun rise over 2 miles of protected coastline that will remain exactly as Emily Morrison intended. A living testament to the value of saying no to the wrong things and yes to the right ones.